you?
Hi, Elena. I'm doing well, thanks. How about you?
I'm great. Welcome everyone to our podcast. My name is Elena.
And I'm Jack. In this podcast, we talk about interesting topics to help you improve your English.
Today, we are discussing a very serious and important topic, war and violence.
Yes, war and violence have affected many people in history and continue to affect the world today. It's important to understand these words so we can talk about them.
That's right. Before we start our discussion, let's define some important words. I will introduce the first word, civil war. A civil war is a war between groups of people in the same country. For example, the country suffered for many years because of the Civil War.
Violence. Violence is when people use physical force to hurt others. For example, the government is trying to stop violence in the city.
Attack. An attack is when someone tries to hurt or damage something or someone. For example, the army planned an attack on the enemy base.
Fight. To fight means to use force to hurt someone or defend yourself. For example, the soldiers had to fight to protect their land.
Enemy. An enemy is a person or group that wants to harm you. For example, during the war, they saw each other as enemies.
Protect. To protect means to keep someone or something safe. For example, the soldiers tried to protect the civilians from danger.
Defend. To defend means to protect from an attack. For example, the castle was built to defend the city from invaders.
Battle. A battle is a fight between two groups, usually in a war. For example, the battle lasted for many hours and both sides lost many soldiers.
Explosion. An explosion is when something bursts with a loud noise and force. For example, the explosion destroyed many buildings in the town.
Casualty. A casualty is a person who is killed or injured in war or an accident. For example, the hospital was full of casualties from the battle.
Death. Death is when a person or living thing stops living. For example, war causes a lot of death and suffering.
Injured. Injured means hurt or wounded. For example, many people were injured in the explosion.
Now that we understand these words, let's start talking about war and violence.
Yes, war has been a part of human history for thousands of years. It is one of the biggest problems in the world.
Yes, and unfortunately, war often begins because of disagreements between countries, governments, or even different groups of people within the same country. This is how a civil war starts. When people in the same country start fighting each other, it can cause great suffering.
That's true. Civil wars can last for many years, and they are often very destructive. They lead to violence, destruction, and many deaths. People lose their homes, their jobs, and sometimes even their families.
Yes, and in war, there are always two sides. Each side sees the other as the enemy. They believe they must defeat the enemy to survive or win the war. But in reality, war doesn't just affect the soldiers. It affects everyone, including innocent people.
Exactly. And during war, there are many attacks. Armies attack cities, villages, and military bases. Sometimes innocent people become casualties of these attacks. They lose their lives or get seriously hurt, even if they are not soldiers.
That's why war is so dangerous. When two sides fight, there are always losses. In battles, people try to defend themselves and their land, but no matter who wins, both sides suffer.
Yes. Some battles last for a short time, while others continue for many days or even months. A battle can decide which side has more power, but it also leads to destruction. And in modern wars, the weapons are very powerful. A single explosion can destroy an entire building in seconds.
That's a terrifying thought. The damage from war is not just physical, it also affects people's emotions and minds. When people see so much death and suffering, it changes them forever.
Yes, and even those who survive can be deeply affected. Many people who are injured in war have to live with pain for the rest of their lives. Others lose family members and struggle to rebuild their lives.
And that's why it's important to talk about these things. If we understand the effects of war and violence, maybe we can find ways to prevent them in the future.
Yes, preventing war and violence is not easy, but it is possible. Many people and organizations work hard to promote peace and stop conflicts before they turn into war. They try to find solutions through discussions instead of fights.
That's true. Talking and negotiating can help solve problems without using weapons or violence. But sometimes people believe that war is the only way to solve their problems, and that leads to more attacks and suffering.
Yes, and when a war begins, governments and armies focus on how to protect their people and land. They build strong defenses and train soldiers to fight. But no matter how much they prepare, war always leads to casualties. Soldiers and civilians lose their lives, and many others are badly injured.
Exactly. Even those who survive often lose their homes or have to leave their country. They become refugees looking for a safe place to live. War forces millions of people to leave everything behind and start over.
And when people lose everything, it creates more problems. Without jobs, homes, or security, people struggle to survive. Some even turn to violence because they feel they have no other choice.
That's one of the worst effects of war. It doesn't just destroy buildings, it destroys lives, families, and entire communities. The pain and fear remain even after the war is over.
Yes, and history shows us that wars can last for years, even decades. The effects don't disappear quickly. People need time to heal, rebuild, and recover from the losses.
And that's why it's so important to find ways to stop wars before they start. Instead of seeing others as the enemy, we should try to understand different perspectives and work together for peace.
Yes, understanding and communication are key to avoiding war. Many conflicts start because of fear, misunderstanding, or the belief that fighting is the only way to solve a problem. But in reality, war creates more problems than it solves.
That's right. Instead of focusing on war, countries should focus on peace and security. They should work on ways to defend their people without causing harm to others. Strong leadership, education, and fair treatment of people can help prevent conflict.
And when war does happen, it's important to help those affected. Many organizations provide aid to people who are suffering. They help rebuild homes, treat the injured, and support families who have lost everything.
Yes, and these organizations also help spread awareness about the effects of war. They remind us that every battle has a cost. Even if one side wins, both sides lose lives, resources, and peace.
And sometimes, even after the war ends, the pain continues. Cities that have suffered explosions and destruction take years to rebuild. Families who have lost loved ones never fully recover.
That's why it's important to remember that war should always be the last option. Violence brings suffering, but peace brings hope. If people can learn to solve problems without fighting, the world will be a much better place.
Yes, and it's up to all of us to work towards a future without war. Leaders, citizens, and communities all have a role to play in creating a safer, more peaceful world.
Yes, every person has a role in promoting peace. It's not just about leaders making decisions, it's about how we treat each other every day. If we choose communication instead of violence, we can prevent many conflicts before they grow into something worse.
That's true. Many wars start with small disagreements that become bigger over time. If people and governments learn to solve problems through discussion, they can avoid fights, attacks, and unnecessary suffering.
And when conflicts do happen, it's important to focus on protecting people, not just winning. Defending human rights, helping refugees, and rebuilding communities after war should be priorities for every country.
Exactly. War is not just about soldiers and battles, it's about real people, families, and lives. The effects of war, like death, destruction, and casualties, last for generations. That's why peace is always the best solution.
Yes, and even though history is full of wars, we can learn from the past. The more we understand the terrible effects of war, the more we can work toward peace and prevent future conflicts.
So, to summarize, we talked about how war and civil war start, the destruction they cause, and how people suffer from explosions, injuries, and loss. We also discussed how peace is possible when people work together and focus on solutions instead of violence.
That's right. We hope this conversation gave you new ideas and helped you learn some useful English words. If you like this podcast, please like the video, leave a comment, and share it with your friends and family.
And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more interesting discussions.
Thank you all for listening. Stay safe, be kind, and let's work towards a more peaceful world.
Take care, everyone. See you next time.